Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on reporting business performance. Today is the second webinar in a series titled Using Lean Six Sigma Black Belt Skills Outside of Lean Six Sigma Projects. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for taking time again to join us. Wanted to go over the logistics briefly before we get started that we covered last time, so I'll jump through them, but we will not be able to hear you. You are muted, so please be sure to send us your questions through the GoToWebinar system. We will check them. We appreciate when you send them throughout the webinar and then again at the end, so be sure to text those in. We are recording this, so if you want to go back and review this later, we will send you a link just like we did for the first session. So you'll get that information within the next 24 to 48 hours on how you can access the recording. We'll also send you the slides, a copy of the slides that Rick is presenting today. And we're planning to run about an hour. So if we have a lot of questions, that could potentially go over 1 hour, but the content will be done before that time. I'm going to hand over the presentation to Rick, our lead instructor here at Smarter Solutions. I won't give you his full bio, as you all heard from him last week, but as you know, he is a very valuable part of Smarter Solutions, our lead instructor, and he will be speaking with you today. Thanks again for joining, and here's Rick.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming on. Again, Smarter Solutions, we're a consulting firm out of Austin, Texas. Started with Lean Six Sigma training, and now we've moved on to really using those tools for business success, which is sort of where the thoughts for this webinar series came from. Today's lecture or discussion will come out of Forrest Breifogel's Volume 2 book out of his IEE, or Integrated Enterprise Excellence series. It's really the how-to book on doing a deployment of the Lean Six Sigma tools at the enterprise level. And it runs from your mission and vision down to come up with a good project pipeline. We're going to talk about today parts of this process about reporting business performance. As Mallory said, this is the second of 8. We're running through topics that black belts, master black belts can use outside of running projects. And a lot of it came about because many of the mature Lean Six Sigma programs, or any general business improvement program, gets to a point where there's not that many projects, and the ones that you do are complex. They take a long time. So what can you do, and what do you do when you transition out of this role back in the organization? So we're trying to talk about how some of those tools can be taken into the regular business world. So that today, business performance. The end, hopefully we'll demonstrate how you can identify functional performance metrics. In other words, metrics that talk about real functional performance in your organization. How the choice of metrics can lead to firefighting or reactionary behavior, and how we can use the tools from the DMAIC process, or the Lean Six Sigma tools in the analyze phase, to help evaluating your insight and keeping you somewhat from being reactionary, like the second bullet. So let's start out. What do you normally see in business metrics? Tables of data, bar charts, variances in goal. We see that in a lot of planning and financial metrics. How am I spending to plan? And pie charts. Here's a picture of a table of data. Very common out there because it's easy, and most of our ERP and financial systems output in tables of numbers to Excel, which makes very good tables to put in a presentation. If you look at this one, Forrest would say, whenever you see a table of data, it's always followed by a story to explain them, because it's very difficult to pull context at times out of a table. And you never know if they're right, but they are probably true, but they may not tell the whole story. In this table right here, that's got fiscal year actual numbers. One data point for a whole year isn't much of a performance measure. This actually came from the scorecard that the City of Austin was putting out a few years back, talking about how good their utility system's doing. Again, you can't do a lot with it. Other ones, pie charts, bar charts, stacked bars, and line charts. Now, these are real popular because they're easy in Excel. I think they come right out of the chart wizard. You get a bar chart if you do nothing. If you're fancy, they get stacked like the lower right. The question, are all of these good or not? And I think they all take an advantage over a table of data to make a picture. The question we should ask, though, is that picture really communicating the right message to our leadership? Can they make the right business decisions? We're going to be talking a little bit through here about what makes a good performance metric. Right now, I'd say all four of these are not necessarily the best choice. Pie charts are a spot, like a photograph of what's happening right now or over a period. It doesn't have the context of what was before or what's coming after. The line chart, it's a 12-month period, but that's just maybe a fiscal year. Why would you not look before and after? Plus, it's hard to see any patterns in it. The lower left one, I know you can't see the axes possibly, but that's quarterly, that's 12 months. Each month is a set of 4 bars over 4 years. You couldn't make heads or tails of that. And stacked bars, they're tough in the first place. Probably the most common one we see in our efforts to go on to see other businesses is the red, yellow, green scorecard, that the red, yellow, and greens are performed with conditional formatting in Excel generally. Now, this is if you're doing them yourselves, and you see stuff like this, where green is good, red is bad, and yellow is warning, sort of like that stoplight. Now, it has a good intuitive feel for this, that you only have to worry about the reds. The problem is it still is just a snapshot of that moment against a numeric goal. And we see people trying to apply the balanced scorecard issue with these types of reporting methods. But red, yellow, green, your eyes only works if you've got a goal and a target. It doesn't tell you about anything other than meeting a goal or not for that one period. It's missing the performance over time. If you have got a specification that doesn't really have a goal or metric, how do you use it? And that comes into a lot of problems, so people artificially pick goals. I think the worst I have seen since I've been here at Smarter Solutions is we had a Master Black Belt candidate come through, and one of the things we talked to them about is the business side of Lean Six Sigma. And he showed 2 red, yellow, green scorecards in this type of format. One was all green, one was full of red and yellow. And he told the class that, well, the green one is the one we show our customer, and the red, yellow, and green one is the one we use internally to decide what we need to work on. But we don't want our customer yelling at us for things, so we gave them one that was all green. So they had one set of reporting for their customer, and then they had different action limits to use internally they didn't want anybody to see. That's one of the issues with red, yellow, green. Everybody assumes red is bad, but if it's an arbitrary goal, I don't know, it's tough. So it comes to our first question, because I'd like to see what you guys have experienced in reporting your corporate metrics. Now, this could be across your corporation. It could be within your division. And if you aren't in that type of position, it could be anywhere you've looked at business reporting. So please mark it off. Check a couple. You should be able to check all of them that you see. You can do more than one. They're pretty even across there right now, except for my favorite that I'm going to be talking about. But maybe this is going to be a good topic then to get through. So Mallory, whenever you're ready to close it up, there we go. Now you should pop up on your screen and see the big 3, I guess the 4 top ones and one that was low. So we've seen red, yellow, greens, time series charts, bar charts, a lot of tables, but very few control charts. So this will be an interesting talk then, because that's what we're going to be working on. It's why control charts give you a little better insight. Thank you for running that, Mallory. Now we will move on to the next one. Why do companies have, or organizations have, performance measures? And how do they choose to distribute them? I think a lot of people share their financial statements, the qualitative assessments, and sometimes anecdotal stories, or this is, and I think the political realm has a lot of performance reporting with anecdotal stories of so-and-so had a problem or so-and-so found a success. Or you see a lot of them in the business world of saying this customer said that or this customer said that, and we're going to create a whole strategy or strategic plan based on a few stories. Now that's one way to do it. Now a financial statement, if you've been to business school or ran budgets, you can get something out of them. But I'll tell you, they don't tell you an awful lot. They're generally quarterly statements of what happened. Very rear world facing. Qualitative ones, how are we doing? Those are also tough. But why should we report performance? So I hope you're seeing this a little bit of a business course here too, but why? The only reason anybody should be reporting performance is to recognize when performance changes. If it's good, you hope it stays the same. If it's bad, you hope it's moving up. And if it ever starts falling back, you want to act upon it. You also need to use them to demonstrate that you're meeting your customer requirements. If your customer needs a certain thing and you're not meeting it, that's what you want to be monitoring. It is also used to identify improvement opportunities. And some use it to judge an individual's performance. And I don't know if you work in one of those organizations, but there are a number out there that are tying business performance to your personal performance. Not so much at the lower levels in an organization, but at the mid and upper levels of management, people tie performance to your pay. And if we see the CEOs, a lot of it's stock price or equity or numbers like that. So it does happen. Performance measurements are important. Now, as a black belt, where does the performance reporting come about? Where do we do it? Well, we start in two places as a black belt. You talk about performance reporting when you baseline your current project. Most good problem statements start with here's the business problem and here's how it's measured, and your job is to change that metric, your primary measure for your project. Also, when you get to the improve phase, hopefully you're going to tell your organization that, look, I changed the needle. I moved the line. We have better performance as measured by this. What you're doing at that point is identical to performance monitoring you'd expect at the organizational level. Think about it. You're trying to demonstrate your performance is adequate or good at the end of a project. Why would you not use exactly the same tools to measure performance of your business processes? And that's really what we believe here. So what is the method that a black belt generally uses to report performance in a project? Now, I know we don't call it performance reporting. It's really your primary metric reporting. But generally, they tell all of us, and depending on where you were trained, do a control chart to estimate the predictability or stability of the process. And if it is stable, note the yellow box, then you report capability. Could be percent non-compliant, CP, CPKs. If you're old like me, you were taught sigma levels and DPMUs, DPMO. But that's how you did capability. This worked really good in manufacturing where everything had a spec and you had a lot of piece parts and you could count stuff up. But we struggled when we left manufacturing for this. And I think a number of the programs today that are training, especially the quicker ones, they don't seem to emphasize the idea that an unstable process has no capability. So what did we find when we used these regular general rules? We found that a lot of processes aren't stable, but we reported capability anyway. I find that in a good portion of the black belts, green belts, and a few master black belts do it too. Plus, when a process had no specification, it had a target or a goal, well, there was no capability report. You could just tell what it was doing. Now, these made it very difficult, but these are really the same problems that lead into performance reporting issues. What do you do when you don't have a target? How do you report performance? And I'll tell you, picking an arbitrary goal is not a good way to do that. And again, as we said at the beginning, if you have any questions on these topics, please use the GoToWebinar interface, and you type in a little note there. We'll catch it, and I will answer them whenever they come up. It'll make it more enjoyable for all of us. So why do we go back through the DMAIC performance reporting tools? Well, I'm going back through them now because many of us were not taught enough about these topics. It was more a lot of the Lean Six Sigma. I know my first time through, I've been through it 3 times now, was, well, you know, it's already a business problem. You know, if you can do the control chart capability analysis, do it, but just move on and get to fixing the problem. It became a little bit like just a pure lean, which doesn't matter what the metric is, just do the right thing. So a lot of us may not have seen all this. But the goal of this is to recognize what our organization wants for performance reporting. Generally, those pie charts, bar charts, tables and numbers, we would never consider accessible reporting the performance of a project. So why, again, I'd say, why shouldn't both be treated the same way? And I think if you get down and consider this, the Lean Six Sigma project methods are probably a better performance reporting method. All right, so now that I've sort of been standing on a soapbox that you can't see over the internet about, let's get back and talk about one of the other learning points. What makes a good metric? This is a list that's out of the Volume 2 text that I talked about earlier. And when I read it, it almost slapped me in the face that I should have known all these things. But let's talk about each one. Business alignment. Why should you have performance metrics that are not aligned to your business needs? Huh? Should they be honest? Well, of course we'd say honest, but what is honest? Honest means it really shows good when it's good and bad when it's bad, and we don't try to hide things. I was reading an article about why does upper management in the executives, the C-level people, not self-manage themselves and talk about their problems. A lot of it because they don't want to make their peers look bad, so people don't talk about stuff. So I find a lot of metrics at the organizational level that aren't very honest because no one wants to face up to the truth. They all want to work on it. They just don't want anybody to know. But to quote a Clint Eastwood movie, you need the good, the bad, and the ugly when you look at metrics. Consistency. Everything should be consistent. Criteria calculations need to be consistent. If you're measuring lead time across an organization and lead time in a division, you should do it the same way. If you're measuring financial performance, your project management skills, everybody should do it the same way. That sounds obvious, but I bet everybody I go to when they measure the efficiency of something, everybody picks their own way to do efficiency so that it ends up in the 90%. When you get down to how they're doing it, it's all over the map. So again, consistency in your metrics. So if it's one metric here and another part, that everybody does it the same way. Next comes some Lean Six Sigma tools, repeatable and reproducible. You bet, if your metrics are not usable and if one guy collects it, gets a different answer than the other one, again, bad metric. Bad, bad. I was working with one of our clients and they had data they collected after doing a troubleshooting event. It was not the person who did the event that collected the data. It was a week after the event was done and the equipment was restored. A third party would go back through the notes and decide what was the cause and the corrective action. And when they went back to look at the data, it had no relationship to what really happened. If they'd have asked the people who did it, they would have been a little better, but it was completely non-reproducible. Oh, we have a question. Well, comment, must set the business rules for the team. I guess if that's, I'm not quite sure. Yes, the team, if you're talking about the team doing performance metrics, yes. Plus the leadership must set some level of guidelines on how they're going to measure things. And I'll tell you, every business does need to measure things differently based on their vision, their mission, and how they choose to manage themselves. We'll come back a little bit to that. If you have more on that one, please type it in. Actionability would be my next point, and this is probably the one I have the biggest heartache over. Why track any metric that you're not going to take an action when it changes? Think about it. Why would you spend any resource collecting data you're not going to do anything about? And I find it's a weakness of most people who start off performance reporting. And I'll admit, I know this because I've done it at 2 different organizations. That the first thing they did is every number they had in the organization, they put in a control chart, and they put in the metric plan. And I think when I was an engineering manager, we had 760 metrics I had 28 engineers to manage them here in Austin at the manufacturing facility. It was a nightmare. You couldn't do that. Nobody cared if they went out of control. If you can think of control charts at 99% limits for the control limits, with over 700 charts, I'd have 7 out of control all the time randomly. It was really difficult. We ended up cutting back to only ones that we were going to act upon, which ended up being like 25 out of 760. If you think about it, the first time you have a metric chart that shows a big change and you ignore it, you've sent a message to your entire organization that metrics in general don't matter, because the person who is watching this may not understand how you made that value judgment. Time series tracking. Big one, track over time. Any metric reporting that's a snapshot of right now that can't talk about what's been happening in the past, you can't look at trends, you can't separate common from special cause, that leads to reaction and reactionary and firefighting. So everything should be measured over time. Predictability. I see a lot of people care, why would you not measure metrics if it's not to give you a feeling for what's coming tomorrow? And that is a big one. If you're just looking backwards, who cares? It's already happened.
We have a question, Rick. We have metrics that are easy to track and may be useful to troubleshoot. Is this okay?
Okay, I'm going to assume what your meaning is. I'm going to go back a slide. The actionable issue. Collecting data just in case. If that's not what you're talking about, just type back in. But there is a troubleshooter, if you're a black belt or Lean Six Sigma, you want all the deep down, drill down data at some point when you're doing your diagnostics. Well, generally performance measurements and scorecards, which will be our next topic, are not meant to be cause and effect analysis tools. They are to indicate when the cause analysis should be done. Our recommendation is, yeah, collect that data, but do not report it as you would a performance metric. That is there to be pulled up and analyzed if a problem occurs, or if you need action, or if you want to assess capability, or maybe you want to assess what you can do tomorrow. But limit yourself to metrics that you're going to act upon their change. But I hope that answered the question. Thank you for that.
We have one more.
Oh, another one. Thank you.
Agree to use measures which can be acted upon, but what about confirmation assurance of quality performance in critical areas equals no action until non-complaint?
All right. I'm expecting non-compliant there. Now, this is the difference between process control and quality control. Now, quality control is, I'm assuming, what the topic's about. You're collecting data to verify compliance to a customer requirement. You have to do that. Realize that's backwards looking. Deming would call that a, oh boy, I'm going back to teaching the class here. There's analytic and that's an enumerative measurement. Although it's the same measurement, you're measuring it to enumerate or describe the performance of the existing material in front of you. Those do have to be tracked. But I would not necessarily use them the same way as I would a high-level performance metric. Generally, QC or quality control is measuring an individual product. You measure them all separately. I'm more talking right now about organizational business reporting, such as the overall quality of the entire factory, the number of dropped calls for the entire call center. The high-level stuff is really what we're talking about for high-level performance monitoring. Now, what I may not have communicated well is different levels of the organization need different metrics. If I'm the owner of a process that's producing a product or answering certain kinds of calls or processing a certain type of paperwork, I do care, and I would track the quality of the output as a performance metric. But I would treat it like a business metric. But that person will take action if the process changes. Now, I don't know if I'd show that to the CEO, because they want to look at things at their level of action. I think I covered that one. But what I was getting to in all this stuff, you need to collect all that data. I would treat it differently, especially if it's a historical overview or collection for data. Don't treat it like a high-level performance metric that you're trying to predict future performance. All right. Again, keep asking if you have more questions. I did predictability and peer compatibility. A little tougher one to describe, but you want to create your metrics so you can relate them not only across different parts of your organization, but also across other companies to make sure you can do your market research and you can do equal comparisons on your competitors. So you should keep somewhat standard forms for metric, even though you may want to have some additional ones that are specific to your business. But if you want to know how they're using the labor force at 6 different divisions in your organization, if they don't all track it the same, how can you compare them? Same as efficiencies, time on task, and lead times. So you need to have a consistency across it. Another question here for you to answer on. Our interface only gives us 5 answers to choose from. So pick all that apply. Pick my 5 favorite out of that list. I want you to pick the ones you think are most important. So please click on it with your little mouse. There we go. We're getting some people to. Which are most important? At some level, I expect your answer is a function of the problems you've seen also. It looks like they're pretty even. The honesty's pulling ahead, and you should all see it now. Honesty was the winner. The time series track was up there, but note all over 50%. I agree. It's hard to pick these, which one's the most important. But if you're putting together a business program or you're trying to work with your leadership, which is what these webinars are supposed to help you prepare for, the ones about actionability, time series tracking, and honesty are probably the big three, if I've seen. Predictability is something I realize you derive after you get into it a little ways. But actionability is the one I lean on first when I do my consulting work. Well, thank you for that. This is also out of a fine book to read. It's called Real Numbers, Management in Accounting in a Lean Organization. It's not a very new book, but it was written by two folks that were, I believe, chief financial officers and early adopters of lean process. And they wrote a really wonderful book about how lean and accounting go together. But they listed this as what's a good metric. I'd like you to read through them. I'll talk to a couple. Be timely. Notice weekly, daily, hour. Don't just do monthly or quarterly numbers. If you want to manage your business, you have to look at it real time. Look at trends. I like the third one. This is the financial people said most metrics are non-financial. What they're trying to lead to is you can't be driven only by financials. I know in our system we talk about those as financials, as satellite metrics. They are the result of everything you do, the way you treat your people, the way you treat your customers, the way you treat your processes and your suppliers. Those together make your financials good, but there's also the market and a number of external items can affect it. So generally, you want to manage your business on non-financial metrics. One more, which sometimes you should, don't combine measures into a single index. And here I'm going to finish with my last pet peeve in this list. Measure the process, not the people. It's very easy to count people or to measure what I'll say activity. You measure that the activity is going on, not the result or the output of the activity. Outputs are tougher to measure. Activity isn't. So a lot of early adopters of performance scorecards and performance measures measure the activity. It's like in a training department, we'll just track how many people got trained. It's easy. I can count it. A lot of Lean Six Sigma programs count how many people they've trained. But is that really a good measure? Because if they didn't learn anything and they were sat there, they get counted equally. You really want to measure the outcome of a process, not the activity. Good question.
Could you please expound upon do not combine measures of different things into a single index?
Okay. Okay. There's two concepts going on here. One is the central limit theorem type issue, if you study that in your Lean Six Sigma. When you combine too many things into a single measure, it's like taking a huge average, it becomes insensitive to individual changes. That's one issue. But the bigger one they're talking about here is different things. Don't, and I think this comes about a lot of the, I guess, off-the-shelf software to generate metrics and scorecards. At least the one I used was called PB Views a number of years ago. It had you assign every metric with a target and a goal, and it did a percent of performance, and then it combined them up so you could see what percent performance you were all the way up at the top. But what it led you to do is mix dissimilar things that when you added them together, the combination as an index didn't mean anything. Generally what they're talking about is don't measure indexes, measure actual numbers. Don't measure your progress to your budget, monitor your actual spending. Don't measure staffing as a percent of your target, talk about numbers. They really want to lead you to keeping actual numbers and reporting. When you move away to indexes, it's too easy to go, well, that doesn't mean anything. So those are two aspects of it. Combining too many things together and you get these unmoving averages. The second one is if they're too dissimilar, added them together means nothing at all. I know that the leadership would like to have a single score for a department or a single score for a division. It seems elegant and nice and simple, but at the same time, it leads to the wrong behavior because you can't see things change. It may look okay when you've got problems. I always come in the black belt classes talking about, we teach you all about averages, and you plot averages, but customers complain about the extreme values, not the averages. So a lot of this, you end up hiding the real problems going on. So I hope I answered that one. If there's no more questions on these, it is a fine book to read. I'll move on. Now we got here metric comparison. I want to look at some of the standard ones that I'm going to add to it. In the end, we'll come back and talk about control charts. I'm going to play with a little software I like here. It's a virtual whiteboard. I get to draw on it. So let's talk about red, yellow, green scorecards, a year to date, what we'd see from the financial department, and then a performance to plan, another arbitrary one, because we set the plan and now we're going to see how we're performing to it. This would be like if you own a budget, how you're spending to plan, how your expenses are going to plan, something like that. Now, do they have business alignment? These are the 7 or 8 characteristics we talked about. Do they have business alignment? Well, they can if you let them. So they probably can all have business alignment. Year to date, now I'll tell you, this is a cumulative chart usually, which I don't like at all, because it's very difficult for your eyes ever to watch cumulative trends. And performance or plans are based on something that's arbitrary. All right? Now, they can be business aligned. Can they be honest? I have troubles with red, yellow, green. They can be honest if you've got a real spec. So if you got a spec, I'd say it's a yes. But it's not if you don't have a spec, if it's just a number. Year-to-date cumulative stuff, I don't know. I'm going to put a question mark on that one. It's tough. Performance to plan, I'll say is no. Big no. Because all I got to do is change the plan to look better. I could tell you story after story about people that adjusted their budget plan just so they would look good and no one would yell at them. It was completely dishonest. It's like where they generate a whole new college career in metric engineering. Yeah, it's bad. Consistent. Well, you could get a consistency in red, yellow, green because they look the same, but it is inconsistent in how it's applied because sometimes we hide the targets which make it green, red, and yellow. So I'd say no. Year to date, it can be consistent. Performance to plan, I'll say it's a no because you can't. If you set your plan differently, you can change the view of your performance just by changing your plan. R&R, they probably all could be okay if you worry about that stuff. Actionable, this is maybe for all of these. And this one, yeah, it depends how you use it. Time series tracking, now here's where we get an N because it's just squares. Year to date, it's time series, but it isn't across the line. And performance to plan, probably not. Predictability, these are also no, because can you be predictable with anything other than a chart that looks at stability? No. Now, peer compatibility, we'd get a yes on all of these. Now, what I'm going to be moving to here is we're going to make another block on here, which is going to talk about what we're called the 30,000-foot method, which I'll be coming to, which is what we recommend for charting. So I'll come back to this in a minute. All right. If you don't have any questions on that, we're moving on. Now we talk about how we think you should report performance. You should always lead with an assessment of predictability. Because from the early part, why do you measure performance metrics if it's for anything other than planning what you're going to do tomorrow? And once it's predictable, if it's predictable or stable, then you report the performance. Now, if you've got a specification or requirement, you can talk about percent non-conforming. But if you don't have a specification, we recommend talking about the nominal value in a range of expected performance. We generally recommend it at the middle 80%. Now, this isn't as easy as it sounds because you have to have a control chart. Now, there's a whole bunch of control charts, and I'll talk about where we lead to. We're going to use individuals charts or an IMR chart. Now, with this, you identify shifts, process changes out of controls. You also can identify the latest stable region. Now, you should only report performance capability on a stable region. I don't care if they want it over the whole fiscal year. If your process changed at mid-year with an acquisition, you don't report the average revenue across it before and after. You talk about since you had a big change. We would want to do the same thing for performance metrics across the board as we would in projects. All right? We call this concept 30,000-foot level reporting. Now, I have a big mark in there, never report capability on an unstable process. Now, Deming went even further when he talked. He said you should not report capability, because if the process is stable, there's no reason to report capability because it can't change. And if it's unstable, it's not worth reporting capability because it's unstable and it won't matter anyway. Now, I admit he was at an extreme in his 14 points he talked about, but he does have a good point. If it's not stable, why report anything? Now, if it is stable, report the percent it's non-conforming with your requirements. Again, if there's no requirement or specification, go for the median and the range. Now, if I change performance, I have a baseline to compare to. We use this to accept or to assess the acceptability to your organization. Got 3 examples of charts that we'd recommend. These are all done with Minitab, by the way. One, this is a normally distributed process with a specification. So it's got a control chart showing it's stable. We're using a probability plot to show the non-conforming fraction, which is listed on the bottom. What if you've got non-normal data? Now, if you've used control charting and you got non-normal data and you weren't trained across the full tools you had, you struggle. But we recommend charting with the appropriate tools. Use a transformation. In this case, I've got a log normal process that's been improving. Downward values is better. And I can show it doesn't have a spec, but it's typically around, in this case, 101.23, ranging from 0.5 to 2.8 most of the time. So another way to report performance. Now, we're going to go so far as say don't use a P-chart. If you have yield numbers at the business level, I'm not really talking about a single product on a single machine, but at the business level, use an individual's chart for your yield data. Or if you want to deal with defect data. In this case, we have a 7% yield loss in this. Why? No probability plot, no capability analysis, because for yields, the average yield is the business impact of it. Again, this is 30,000-foot level charting. I know when I was first learning this stuff, well after I was a process control student, the instructor called P charts. The P stands for probably should have used an individual's chart. Still sticks with me. Now, all of these charting methods are really discussed in a different book than I started the class on. It's the Volume 3 book in the Integrated Enterprise Excellence series, which is really the handbook for Lean Six Sigma practitioners, but it covers all the ins and outs of control charting. It talks about why, if you're doing process management at like a 50-foot level, why you want to do charting different than if you're doing it at a business or organizational level. And that's what we lead to at the business level. It's individuals charts or an eye chart. I venture to guess, and this is purely my guess, about a third of the statisticians understand the aspect of Schuhart charts and using individuals charts at the business level. And it's really got to do with what drives the control limits. Now, in individuals chart, the control limits are a function of between point variability. X bar and R and P charts and those, all the limits are based on short-term variability. They had a different purpose. Now, I know I'm going to go off topic from the webinar, but I can't help it. Why individuals charts? Because I'm going to assume many of you haven't heard this before. Schuhart charts are what we were taught in SPC courses. If you go back to the history, Walter Schuhart was at AT&T watching them make telephones, and they wanted every handset to be identical. They wanted everything coming out of their assembly line to be identical so they could be interchangeable. So the Schuhart created the charts, and he started with the X bar and R chart so that you'd immediately recognize any change in the output of the process so you could adjust it to put it back where it needed to be. So these charts were created to detect any measure of change. So they used the short-term variability to set the control limits because they want to know if anything was changing outside of short-term variability. But the individual's chart's different. It's more of a Deming view, or I would call it a system control chart rather than a process control chart. Because the control limits are now a function of the difference between sequential points, which is not short-term. It may not be long-term, but it's more mid-term or between-point variability. Your limits seem to be a bit wider, but you're probably making the right assumption for the business. An example of this comes out, and this is out of our black and green belt class. But here's a situation. You've got a key process input that affects the output. You might even know how it affects the output. This could be every batch of raw material change the output, or every time the shift changes, I get a little different output, or call centers that change daily based on the load. Now the question is, should these inputs that I understand be a common or a special cause event? Shuhart would say it's a special cause event because I saw the process changed when a known input changed. He calls them assignable though. But in our Deming view, which we're going to talk about what we think you should use in performance reporting, what this webinar is about, would say that those are common cause events. I have to change shifts. I have to change raw material batches. I have to work every day of the week. We need to have a reporting method that looks at those as common occurrences, not special causes. And that's what leads us to the individuals chart, sometimes averaging. But the goal is to make all common changes common causes so that we will detect the uncommon changes. Like a bad batch of raw material should be out of control, but not the normal differences between raw material. A shift that's in real bad shape should be out of control, but the normal differences in shifts should be considered in control or common cause. That's what we lead to. I hope that was the 30,000-foot view of control charting. So I got another quick question here. This is more about you and your organization doing Lean Six Sigma, or call it basic process improvement. How involved are you in the organizational performance reporting? You can only pick one this time. But it goes from we're not involved at all till we own the reporting system. I wonder where you are. I know where I think the answers will be. All right. It looks like a majority, as soon as you close it out, Mallory. A few people involved seem to be the winner, which means there's a little bit of involvement. But I would venture to say the more you move down this list, the better off your performance reporting gets. At least some of you have a lot, and that's good. All right, thank you for that. And close that one out. Now, how to get involved. This is how I wrap up these webinars. Because the reason you're here is at some level, I hope, to know what your career goes to or how you can benefit the organization, stay employed, as things change. First one, and you'll find this is very similar to the ending of the last webinar. It'll probably be similar to the next one. But how do you get involved in performance reporting? Well, you show interest. Go ask for the data. Find where it's coming from. Who does it? Who reports it? Ask how well, the one at the bottom, how well do they relate to the progress on our strategic plan? Now, the key is to show interest. If you care, the leadership will want to share with you because they do care. Second one, here's what's not to do. Don't tell them they're wrong. Don't say you could do better. Don't say you read a book and I know more than you with 30 years experience. But the fourth one, also don't assume they like what they have. It's what they have. Asking if they want more of what did they want from can be great. And the last one at the bottom, don't assume that it's above your position to get involved. So I'll tell you something, the leadership wants good inputs. I don't care who's doing it. And the last one is to volunteer to assist. Ask for access to the data. Treat it like you would a problem statement or a project. Evaluate for predictivity. If found, then give a capability. Now the big one here, the third one, meet with the metric owner and share the results with them. And I should have bold, underline everything, but never share it with others without the consent of the metric owner. If you want to lose respect to these people, make them look bad in front of other people. Now, this also leads to, if I was coaching when I ran an internship program, no one gets promoted until they already know they can do the job. So if you voluntarily are working this, you have an opportunity to move into a position that does it. With all aspects, you've got to volunteer and work at the level you want to be moved to. All right? Why should we be involved? Well, part of the idea of this whole series is to demonstrate your value outside of running projects. We have got tools that we've learned in the Lean Six Sigma world to analyze performance, look at changes, see special causes, lead improvement events when we see them. We are able to share with the metric owners the pros and cons of different reporting methods and show them how they can do or how they can get better information to do their job. Because I'll tell you something, your leadership wants quality inputs to make good decisions. You have the ability to give that to them. All right. When we talk to our black belts and master black belts about doing this, we find when they pull it out and try it, about a third of all the top metrics they pull out and use these control chart capability analysis tools on, they find something that was not being seen in the current reporting method. And it makes them look good for a lot of, because most of them at this point in their career handle it well. They don't make anybody look bad. They said, hey, we're missing something. Let's do something. So I think you'll find that these tools, you find an awful lot of stuff you'd never seen before. Well, I'm wrapping up to the end here. It's been about 45 minutes, so there's time for you to think about a couple questions if you have them. But we've been through a couple things. How to identify functional performance metrics. That was the characteristics of a good metric. Remember, actionable, my favorite, honest, business-oriented, and aligned. How different reporting methods affect firefighting. Now think about the pie charts and the line charts. If you're doing a spot assessment of a value against a goal, that is a big reason people firefight or overreact to things. When it's in a control chart, you can show that that's a common cause issue. It may be out of specification, but it's a common cause issue. You do not treat that with cause and corrective action. You treat that with long-term process improvement. So the act of using a control chart leads away from firefighting, gets to more methodical process improvement. And hopefully I've tied the DMAIC tools into the same type of tools you could use for performance reporting. Now, you may not use these tools today, but I propose that if you showed these to some of your business leaders, they would be maybe not ready to jump on the bandwagon, but they'd want to know what you're talking about. They want to know why you chose it. They'd want to see how you got this message out of this data. You have a chance of making your leadership better, giving them better tools, better insight, and better performance measures so they can run the business better. That's really what this is all about. If you have any questions, please type them in. When you exit the webinar, there will be a survey that pops up. We appreciate your feedback. They share with me when we're done. It will help me do the next webinars better. Now, is there any questions coming up, Mallory?
The first question, should all metrics be shown throughout the organization?
All right, that's an interesting one. We always think about that writing scorecards. Should everybody in the organization see all of the metrics? Now, you can make a case both ways. Now, and I know privately held companies are far different than public ones about dealing with the financials and such. But I believe everybody needs to understand the performance of the company they work for. If anything, it builds engagement. Plus, when they see something happen, they can see how the high-level business metrics change. Now, I know some companies there's things they do not like to share. But even if it's financials, you can take off the actual revenue and plot it without an x-axis or without a y-axis and show that it's growing or shrinking. But I don't think a lot of businesses that we're working at, the people are honest about how the financials change with the current recession. So yeah, I think they should be shown throughout the organization where it's appropriate. Now, of course, human resources issues, you may not want to do that. But that's probably the bottom line of that one.
Okay, the next question. My leaders will not understand control charts. How can I use them?
I think that's a generally true statement for most organizations, unless they've had a mature process improvement organization or maybe even manufacturing for years. Because control charts are a fancy statistical tool. Best thing I can do is you start out by, that's when the one-on-one discussions, you show them what the message is. Lead with the message that you learned and show them how you figured it out. Because really what they care about is the message. They will learn to appreciate it. But I think throwing them up in a big presentation in front of a room, I think would be tough if they're not used to them. This is something you do with individuals as you spread the word or pass it on. All right?
We still have a few minutes, so please let us know if you have any questions. We did get one comment. One participant has had success using linear regression. Do you have anything to add to that, Rick?
Linear regression. Now, boy, that's an interesting one, because I generally tell people wary of using linear regression in performance reporting. because it starts out with a belief of it's a way to look at trends to see if you've got stuff moving. Because if you do linear regression, the general rule is you can never extrapolate with it. Now, it is a wonderful tool to understand performance and change and understand the historical nature of it. But generally, we try to avoid linear regression with the x-axis or predictor being time. What you lead into is time series analysis, and you could say, well, that is a linear regression. And it is, but it puts a few more constraints on it so that you can use it for forecasting. Now, I would recommend if you find linear regression is a great tool and you're seeing nice, predictable trends, consider adjusting the business metric to the rate of change rather than trying to plot the trend in actual numbers. You'll find plotting the rate of change, which is the coefficient, the slope coefficient in the regression. If you plot that, you'll find that it's extremely sensitive to changes in the slope, which means you have a tool that is wonderful for showing changes in the rate. We recommend this for revenue metrics, growth metrics, even capacity stuff. You want the rate of change of the business constant. It's a wonderful way to plot it. So regression is a good analysis tool. I'm glad you have success with it. There are software out there that will use linear regression and then plot control limits around the regression line. They're mathematically elegant, and they do work. My experience is, though, when you go away from straight line charts, it's tougher for people's eyes to translate them. But if they're working for you, then I can't disagree. We got another one, Mallory?
Yes. How do you tie a personal balance scorecard to the corporate scorecard and develop KPI for self-evaluation?
Wow. Talk about the most difficult question at all, measuring performance of individuals. In my whole career, and I've been doing this a while, I've never found the perfect metric for measuring a professional's performance. Now, if it's somebody who's a factory line worker that's putting widgets on a thing or answering calls, you can do that. When you get into the professional world where it's knowledge and thinking and planning, it's a lot tougher to do it. And I think that's why the balance scorecard was brought up, because you do need to measure the balance of it. Now we get to my personal belief. The personal development KPIs, or what you're doing for personal development, should be detached or completely separate from the enumeration of your paycheck. Because pay should really be a function of the business performance overall and your position. At some level, just because I had a good year, should I get more money? If I had a bad year, they never take it away. I came from an environment at Texas Instruments that we moved into that type of payments, and I liked it. It led to better behavior by the employees. But I would say you need if for an individual, I would look at at some level, assess the value of you to the organization. What do you do that provides value and generates revenue? Because part of your personal assessment should be measuring your ability to add value to the organization so they keep you employed. Now, there should be some personal stuff. You should be measuring your continuing education. You should be measuring your attendance and your health on a personal side, because if that's getting in the way, how well you're producing benefits that you're assigned. And I would try to tie yourself to the current strategies or the satellite performance and financials. That's just a tough question. I don't have a good answer for it. So we got the next one here. What direction for servant leadership? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I know servant leadership is sometimes considered a Christian term, but I'd ask you not to take it that way necessarily. What it really means is leading without being in charge. You lead through example. Your job is to make everybody else look good. I think that's a wonderful black belt characteristic. That your job is to make the process owner successful. It's not to make yourself successful, because I'm a believer there is an excessive amount of thanks out there for people that do a good job. And if you make everybody around you look good, they want to keep you there because you are now influencing the success of the organization through more than one person. So I think you lead by standing behind people and giving them what they need. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for. We've got a question come in here. All right. I think is that just about it then? We thank you for your time. Again, with all these, if you have follow-on questions, you want to email, you can email to rick.h@smartersolutions.com. When you finish up this webinar, you'll get a survey. There is a question on there if you want to be contacted or don't want to be contacted, mark it as such. If you want to be contacted and want to have a communication with this topic afterwards, I am excited about doing it. The fun part of my job, helping people work beyond their projects. So thank you very much for your time.